Daniel Blackwood stood in the middle of his grand living room, his hands clenched into fists, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. The billionaire CEO of Blackwood Enterprises was known for his ruthless business tactics, his ability to break competitors without so much as blinking. But nothing in the boardroom had ever made him feel this kind of uncertainty. Standing across from him was Ava Turner, the woman he had hired as a nanny for his son. The woman he had strictly told himself was nothing more than an employee. But now, he was looking at her differently. The realization hit him like a freight train. He was falling for her. A deep, uncomfortable silence filled the space between them, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace. He could see the same realization flicker in Ava's wide hazel eyes, the way her breath hitched, the way she tightened her grip on the cup of tea she had been holding. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to him. Not to Daniel Blackwood, the man who had built walls so high around his heart that no one, not even himself, could climb them. But then, how had she managed to slip through? And more importantly, what was he going to do about it? 2 months earlier, the sound of tiny footsteps echoed through the long, empty halls of the Blackwood estate. A small boy with tousled brown hair darted across the marble floors, his face pale with fear. His hands trembled as he clutched a small teddy bear, the only source of comfort in his lonely world. "Sam!" A deep voice boomed from behind him. Sam flinched but didn't stop running. He knew his father was busy, always busy. He knew better than to disturb him. But tonight was different. Tonight, the nightmares had been too much. Daniel Blackwood sighed as he watched his 6-year-old son stop near the staircase, his little chest rising and falling rapidly. He wasn't a man used to showing softness, but something about the way Sam's shoulders hunched made his own heart ache. "Sam," he said, this time quieter. The boy turned around slowly, his small hands gripping his teddy even tighter. "I had a bad dream," he whispered. Daniel ran a hand down his face. He had no idea how to handle this. Business. He could handle that. Deals. He could close them with his eyes closed. But a scared child in the middle of the night? That was something entirely different. Kneeling down, he placed a firm but gentle hand on Sam's shoulder. "You know you can come to me, right?" Sam hesitated before nodding. But Daniel could see it, the doubt in his son's eyes. The hesitation. And that's when he knew. He needed help. The next morning, Daniel made the decision. He would hire a nanny. Someone who could take care of Sam, be there for him in ways that Daniel simply didn't know how. He placed a call to his assistant. "I want the best," he said. Nothing less. 3 days later, Ava Turner arrived. She was nothing like he expected. She wasn't stiff and formal like the previous nannies who had come and gone. She wasn't intimidated by the grandeur of the mansion or his cold demeanor. Instead, she walked into the house with a kind smile and a presence that felt warm. Daniel watched from the top of the staircase as she kneeled down in front of Sam, holding out her hand. "Hi, Sam. I'm Ava." Sam stared at her for a long moment before finally, hesitantly, shaking her hand. That was the first time Daniel saw his son smile in months. Ava Turner was different, and that terrified him. At first, Daniel tried to keep his distance. He buried himself in work, convinced himself that Ava was just another employee. But she wasn't. He saw it in the way Sam laughed when she was around, the way she sat with him at bedtime, patiently reading stories, the way she always knew exactly what to say when his son was sad or scared. She was fixing something that Daniel hadn't even realized was broken. But he wasn't the only one watching. There were others who didn't want Ava in the Blackwood house, people who didn't trust her, people who wanted her gone, and they were willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. One evening, Daniel returned home late from work. He expected to find Sam in bed, Ava finishing up for the night. Instead, he found chaos. Ava stood in the center of the living room, her face pale, her hands shaking. Papers were scattered everywhere, the front door slightly ajar. Sam clung to her leg, his face buried in her dress. Daniel's blood turned ice cold. "What happened?" His voice was sharp, demanding. Ava swallowed hard before she spoke. "Someone broke into the house." Daniel's entire body went rigid. His sharp eyes darted around the room, taking in the mess, the overturned lamp, the papers littering the floor, the faint scuff marks near the open door. His mansion had some of the best security money could buy. How had this happened? He turned back to Ava, who was still holding Sam close, her fingers trembling as she gently ran them through the boy's hair. "Did you see who it was?" His voice was sharp, controlled. Ava shook her head. "No. I was putting Sam to bed when I heard a noise downstairs." At first, I thought it was you coming home, but then I saw the door was open. She took a shaky breath. By the time I got here, whoever it was, they were already gone. Daniel clenched his jaw. Someone had broken into his house. A place that was supposed to be untouchable, safe. And worst of all, they had done it while his son was inside. His eyes flickered to Sam. The boy hadn't moved, his small hands clutching Ava's dress like a lifeline. His shoulders were shaking, and Daniel's stomach twisted. His son was terrified. That was the last straw. Daniel turned toward the intercom panel on the wall and pressed a button. Within seconds, the deep voice of his head of security, Mark Holloway, crackled through. "Sir, get the security footage from the last 2 hours," Daniel ordered. "I want to know who stepped foot in my house." "Understood." Daniel let go of the button and turned back to Ava. His eyes darkened when he noticed the way her hands were still shaking. "Are you hurt?" Ava blinked, as if surprised by the question. "No, She hesitated. "I'm fine. Just shaken up." Daniel nodded stiffly. "Take Sam upstairs. I'll handle this." Ava hesitated for a moment before nodding. She scooped Sam into her arms, holding him close as she carried him toward the grand staircase. The boy didn't resist. He was too exhausted, too frightened. Daniel exhaled slowly, his fists clenching at his sides. Someone had dared to threaten his home. And whoever it was, they were going to regret it. The next morning, Daniel sat in his office, his fingers tapping against the desk as he watched the security footage. The video feed showed a figure dressed in black slipping through the front gate, just before Ava had put Sam to bed. They moved quickly, with precision. Whoever they were, they weren't amateurs. But that wasn't what made Daniel's blood boil. It was what the intruder had done. The figure had gone straight to the study, straight to his private office. They had rifled through his papers, searching for something. This wasn't a random burglary. This was targeted. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Who would do this? Who had something to gain? As if on cue, his phone rang. He picked it up without hesitation. "Blackwood. Daniel." A smooth, confident voice rang through the line. "I heard there was an incident at your house last night." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Victor?" Victor Langston, his biggest rival in business. A man who had spent years trying, and failing, to bring Blackwood Enterprises down. Victor chuckled. "Relax, old friend. I was just checking in. It'd be a shame if someone got the wrong idea. Thought maybe your little Nanny was a problem." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Stay away from her." Another chuckle. "Oh, Daniel, you always were protective of your possessions. But let's be real. You don't really know anything about this woman, do you?" Daniel's eyes darkened. Victor was playing games. He didn't have proof. He was fishing for a reaction. And Daniel wasn't going to give him one. "You just made a mistake," he said coldly. "You think I won't find out who did this? You think I won't bury them?" Victor sighed dramatically. "So dramatic. Well, do let me know when you find out, won't you? I'd hate to see anything unfortunate happen." The line went dead. Daniel slowly set the phone down, his mind buzzing with questions. Victor had just hinted that Ava wasn't who she seemed to be. But Daniel had done a background check before hiring her. She was clean. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. And once a seed is planted, it only takes time to grow. That afternoon, Daniel found Ava in the garden with Sam. The boy was laughing as Ava chased him around the yard, her long brown hair shining under the sunlight. For a moment, Daniel just watched. She was good with him, better than anyone ever had been. But that didn't mean she wasn't hiding something. He approached slowly, his hands in his pockets. "Ava." She turned, startled. "Oh, hi, Mr. Blackwood." "Daniel," he corrected automatically. Her lips parted slightly, but she nodded. "Daniel." He glanced at Sam, who was still running around. Then he looked back at Ava. "I need to talk to you." Ava immediately picked up on the seriousness in his tone. She nodded. "Of course." He led her inside, into his office. The moment the door shut, he turned to face her. "There was a break-in last night," he said, watching her carefully. Ava swallowed. "I know. I was there." "Yes. And the thing is," Daniel leaned against his desk, crossing his arms, "whoever broke in wasn't after valuables. They were after information." Ava frowned. "Information." Daniel studied her expression. If she was lying, she was good at it. "I ran a background check on you before hiring you," he continued. "It came back clean. But Victor Langston, one of my biggest competitors, hinted that you might not be who you say you are." Ava's eyes widened. "What? That's ridiculous." I'm just a nanny. Are you? Daniel asked quietly. Ava took a step back. You think I had something to do with this? I don't know, Daniel admitted. But someone targeted my house last night. Someone who knew exactly where my office was, what to look for. And Victor seemed a little too interested in you for my liking. Ava's hands clenched into fists. So what? You think I'm working for him? Daniel didn't answer right away. He was still watching her, still analyzing every reaction. I don't trust people easily, he finally said. And I don't like coincidences. Ava exhaled sharply, her face filled with frustration. Well, I don't like being accused of things I didn't do. The tension in the room was thick. Neither of them spoke. And then, a loud crash came from outside. Daniel's head snapped up. Ava turned toward the window, her face pale. And then they heard it. Sam screaming. Daniel didn't think. He just ran. Daniel sprinted down the hallway, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. The only thought in his mind was his son. The scream had been sharp, full of terror. He reached the garden in seconds. His sharp eyes scanned the area, and then he saw it. Sam stood frozen near the fountain, his tiny body trembling. In front of him, a man dressed in black was holding a knife. Daniel didn't hesitate. He launched forward like a predator, his fury blinding. The man barely had time to react before Daniel tackled him to the ground, knocking the knife from his grasp. The intruder groaned in pain, but Daniel didn't care. His fists slammed into the man's face, again and again, rage consuming him. You dare come near my son? Daniel's voice was lethal, dripping with fury. The man gasped, spitting out blood. I wasn't gonna hurt him. Daniel grabbed him by the collar, his jaw clenched. Then why are you here? Before the man could answer, a pair of strong hands grabbed Daniel's shoulders. Sir, Mark Holloway, his head of security, pulled him back. We've got this. Daniel exhaled sharply, stepping away. His knuckles were bloody, his breathing ragged. Mark and his men hauled the intruder to his feet. We'll take him to the security room, Mark said. We'll get answers. Daniel gave a stiff nod, his fury barely contained. Make sure he talks. Mark nodded before dragging the intruder away. Only then did Daniel turn back to Sam. The boy was still shaking, his little face pale. Ava was already kneeling beside him, her arms wrapped around his small body. It's okay, sweetheart, she murmured. You're safe now. Daniel approached slowly, kneeling beside them. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Sam's forehead. You're okay, he said gently. Sam looked up at him, his blue eyes still wet with tears. Daddy, he whispered. I was so scared. Daniel swallowed past the lump in his throat. He wasn't good with emotions, wasn't good at comforting. But right now, none of that mattered. He pulled his son into his arms, holding him tightly. No one will ever hurt you, he vowed. Not while I'm alive. Ava watched them, her heart aching. She had never seen Daniel like this, raw, vulnerable. And that scared her more than anything. Because for the first time, she realized she was starting to care. An hour later, Daniel stood in the security room, arms crossed, his expression dark. The intruder was tied to a chair, his lips split, one eye swollen. Mark stood beside him, arms folded. He's not talking. Daniel sighed impatiently, stepping forward. Who sent you? The man smirked, his swollen face twisting. You know who? Daniel clenched his jaw. Victor. That bastard had crossed the line. Daniel turned to Mark. Take care of him. Mark nodded. Understood, sir. Daniel didn't wait for more. He turned and walked out of the room, his mind racing. Victor had made his move. And now, Daniel was going to make his. But first, he had to deal with Ava. That evening, Ava sat on the couch, her mind still reeling from what had happened. She had always known working for Daniel Blackwood would be intense. But she never expected to be in the middle of something so dangerous. Tea. She looked up, startled. Daniel stood in front of her, holding out a steaming cup. Ava blinked. You made me tea? Daniel smirked slightly. My assistant made it. Ava huffed out a small laugh, taking the cup. Figures. He sat down across from her, watching her carefully. You're scared, he said. It wasn't a question. Ava sighed. Of course I am. Someone broke into the house. Someone tried to hurt Sam. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand down his face. I won't let that happen again. Ava studied him. This has happened before, hasn't it? Daniel hesitated. Then finally he nodded. People have always tried to get to me. Rivals. Enemies. But never like this. Never through my son. His jaw tightened. And I don't like coincidences, Ava. Ava froze. What are you saying? Daniel's piercing gaze locked onto hers. "I need to know the truth," he said. "Who are you really?" Ava's breath hitched. He didn't trust her. And maybe he shouldn't. Ava's grip on the teacup tightened. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She knew this moment would come eventually. She had just hoped it wouldn't be this soon. Daniel's gaze was sharp, unrelenting. He was waiting. "I already told you who I am," she said quietly. His jaw flexed. "Did you?" Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Ava's hands trembled slightly as she set the cup down. "I don't know what Victor told you, but I have nothing to do with him." Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Then explain something to me. Why did he seem so interested in you? Why did someone break into my house the same week you moved in?" Ava swallowed hard. She knew how this looked. But she also knew the truth, at least most of it. "I can't answer for Victor," she said finally. "But I swear to you, Daniel, I'm not working for him. I came here for Sam. That's all." Daniel studied her carefully. He didn't say anything. But she could see it, the doubt still lingering in his eyes. She hated that. Hated that he saw her as a threat. She had spent weeks earning Sam's trust, making him laugh, helping him sleep peacefully for the first time in months. And now, all of that was on the verge of shattering. Ava stood abruptly, her pulse racing. "If you don't trust me," she said, voice quiet but firm, "fire me." Daniel stiffened. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he stood as well. His tall frame loomed over her, his expression unreadable. "I don't trust people easily," he admitted. Ava lifted her chin. "Then I guess I'll just have to prove you wrong." For a second, something flickered in his eyes, something she couldn't quite name. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. "Get some rest," he said gruffly. "We'll talk more in the morning." Ava didn't argue. She simply turned and walked away, her heart still hammering. Daniel watched her go, his jaw clenched. He wanted to believe her. But something told him this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Ava woke early, slipping into the kitchen to make breakfast. She needed a distraction, something to keep her mind from replaying last night's conversation with Daniel. But as she cracked eggs into a pan, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Someone was watching her. She turned slowly. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing green eyes that sent a shiver down her spine. Ava's breath caught. She knew that face. She hadn't seen him in years. But she would never forget him. "Hello, Ava," he said smoothly, stepping into the room. "It's been a while." Ava's blood ran cold. "Liam," she whispered. Daniel's voice suddenly cut through the air. "Who the hell are you?" Ava whirled around. Daniel stood in the doorway now, his expression dark, dangerous. His eyes flicked between her and the stranger, his body tense. Liam smirked. "Relax, Blackwood. I'm just an old friend." Daniel's fists clenched. "I don't believe that for a second." Ava's pulse pounded in her ears. This was bad. Very, very bad. Because if Liam was here, it meant her past had finally caught up with her. Ava's stomach twisted into knots. She forced herself to stand tall, even as her hands trembled. "Liam," she said carefully, "what are you doing here?" Liam Langston leaned against the kitchen island, his smirk never wavering. "What, no warm welcome? I thought you'd be happy to see me, Ava." Daniel took a step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Ava, his protective instincts kicking in. "I'll ask one more time. Who the hell are you?" Liam's gaze flicked to Daniel, and his smirk widened. "I should have introduced myself properly. Liam Langston, Victor Langston's younger brother." Daniel's expression darkened instantly. His whole body tensed like a predator ready to strike. Ava swallowed hard. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. Liam chuckled, shaking his head. "Relax, Blackwood. I'm not here to cause trouble." He turned his attention back to Ava, his eyes gleaming with something unreadable. "I just wanted to see how my dear old friend was doing." Ava forced her voice to remain steady. "I stopped being your friend a long time ago." Liam's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. "Now that hurts." He sighed dramatically, running a hand through his dark hair. "I always told you, Ava. You were meant for bigger things. And yet here you are, playing nanny for the Blackwood family." His eyes flickered to Daniel. "I have to admit, I didn't see that coming." Daniel's patience snapped. "You have 30 seconds to tell me why you're really here before I throw you out myself." Liam laughed, completely unfazed. "Oh, you're exactly how I imagined. No wonder my brother hates you." Daniel's jaw clenched. Liam straightened, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit. "Fine. I'll get to the point. My brother wanted me to remind you that this little arrangement you have, it won't last. He glanced at Ava again. And Ava, you and I both know you're sitting on borrowed time. Ava's heart pounded. Liam's smirk returned, but this time it was sharper. See you around, Ava. With that, he turned and strode out of the kitchen, disappearing down the hall. The moment he was gone, Daniel spun to face her. Start talking. Now. Ava pressed a hand to her forehead, feeling lightheaded. She exhaled shakily. It's complicated. Daniel's voice was ice. Then simplify it. Ava bit her lip. She had known this moment was coming. She had just hoped she'd have more time. She met Daniel's gaze, her own eyes filled with something unreadable. Liam and I, we have a history, she admitted. Daniel's expression was stone. What kind of history? Ava hesitated. And then, in a whisper, she said, I used to work for the Langstons. The air between them went deathly still. Daniel's entire body locked up. You what? Ava swallowed hard. I used to work for them. A long time ago. Before I ever came here. Before I ever met Sam. Daniel took a slow step back, as if physically distancing himself from her. His eyes were unreadable, but his jaw was tight, his fists clenched. You've been lying to me this entire time. Ava's chest ached. No, she shook her head. I left them, Daniel. I left that life behind. Daniel let out a humorless laugh. And I'm supposed to believe that? After everything? Ava's heart twisted. Yes, because it's the truth. Daniel turned away, running a hand through his hair. His entire world felt like it had just shifted. The woman he had started to trust, the woman who had been helping his son, she had once been involved with the very people who were trying to destroy him. He exhaled sharply, his back still to her. Get out. Ava's breath hitched. What? Daniel turned back to her, his eyes cold, unreadable. You heard me. Get out of my house. Ava felt as if the floor had been ripped out from under her. Daniel, please. I trusted you. His voice was low, dangerous. I let you into my home. I let you take care of my son. His eyes burned with betrayal. And you never told me who you really were. Tears pricked at Ava's eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't break. Not now. I left that life behind, she whispered. I left for a reason. Daniel's jaw clenched. And what reason was that? Ava hesitated, the words heavy on her tongue. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Because I found out what they were planning to do to you. Daniel froze. Ava took a shaky breath. I was never like them, Daniel. I never wanted to be. But when I found out the truth, when I found out Victor was planning to ruin you, I couldn't be part of it anymore. Daniel's throat tightened. That's why I left, Ava continued, her voice filled with emotion. That's why I disappeared. And that's why I took this job. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Ava swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I came here to protect Sam, she whispered. Silence filled the room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, a loud crash sounded from upstairs. Ava and Daniel's heads snapped toward the ceiling. And then, Sam screamed. Daniel didn't think. He just ran. Daniel took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. Sam's scream still echoed in his ears, filling him with a level of fear he hadn't felt in years. Ava was right behind him, her breathing ragged as she pushed herself to keep up. The moment they reached Sam's room, Daniel shoved the door open. His blood ran cold. Sam was standing on his bed, his tiny body pressed against the headboard, his eyes filled with sheer terror. And across the room, standing by the window, was a man dressed in black. For a split second, everything froze. Then Daniel moved. He launched himself at the intruder without hesitation, tackling him to the ground. The man let out a grunt, but he wasn't weak. He twisted sharply, shoving Daniel off. Daniel stumbled back, his fists already clenched, his mind in full attack mode. You made a mistake, Daniel growled. The man didn't reply. Instead, he lunged. Daniel ducked the first swing, then threw a hard punch to the man's ribs. The intruder staggered, but he wasn't down. He recovered fast, grabbing a lamp off the nightstand and smashing it toward Daniel's head. Daniel dodged just in time. The lamp shattered against the floor. Sam! Ava's voice rang through the chaos. Daniel barely registered her movements as she darted across the room, grabbing Sam and pulling him into her arms. The intruder noticed. His eyes flicked to them, his next target. Daniel saw the shift in his stance, and something inside him snapped. With a growl, he drove forward, slamming the man into the wall. He gripped his collar, his muscles burning with fury. "You don't touch my son." The man sneered. Too late. Before Daniel could react, the intruder kicked his leg out, knocking him off balance. Ava gasped. "Daniel!" Daniel recovered quickly, but the momentary distraction gave the man an opening. He lunged toward Ava and Sam. Ava's grip tightened around the boy. "Stay behind me," she whispered. The intruder was fast, too fast. He reached for Sam. But before his fingers could touch the child, Ava spun and slammed her fist into the man's throat. The intruder choked, stumbling back, clutching his neck. His eyes widened in shock. Daniel took the chance. He drove his fist into the man's jaw with all the force he had. The intruder crumpled. Daniel stood over him, his chest heaving, his knuckles bleeding. The room fell into silence. The only sound was Sam's quiet sobs as he clung to Ava. Daniel turned to them, his heart still racing. "Is he okay?" Ava nodded, stroking Sam's hair. "He's scared, but he's okay." Daniel exhaled slowly, his rage still simmering beneath his skin. Mark and the security team burst into the room moments later. They took one look at the scene, the unconscious intruder, Daniel's bloody fists, Ava shielding Sam, and immediately sprang into action. "Get him out of here," Daniel ordered, his voice ice cold. Mark nodded. "On it." As the security team hauled the man away, Daniel turned back to Ava. She was still holding Sam, her arms wrapped protectively around him. And for the first time, Daniel saw her differently. Not as an employee, not as someone with a past connected to his enemies, but as the one person who had risked everything to protect his son. Something inside him shifted, and that scared him more than anything else. 30 minutes later, the house was locked down. Security guards were stationed at every entrance. The police had taken the intruder into custody. But Daniel couldn't shake the anger boiling inside him. Victor had crossed a line. And now, Daniel was going to burn his entire world down. He stood in his office, gripping the edge of his desk. Ava stepped in quietly, her expression unreadable. "How's Sam?" Daniel asked, not looking at her. "He's asleep," she said softly. "I stayed with him until he calmed down." Daniel exhaled, his grip tightening. "This is my fault." Ava frowned. "Daniel, I should have known Victor would try something like this," he cut in. His voice was low, full of self-loathing. "I should have seen it coming." Ava hesitated. Then, carefully, she walked closer. "This isn't your fault," she said firmly. "The only people to blame are Victor and his men." Daniel finally looked at her. For the first time, he wasn't just seeing Ava as an employee, or even as a former Langston associate. He was seeing her as someone who had put herself in danger for his son. Someone who had stood between Sam and a threat without hesitation. And for the first time in years, he felt something other than anger. Something dangerous. Something terrifying. Something he had sworn never to feel again. But before he could say anything, Ava spoke. "There's something else you need to know." Daniel's expression hardened. "What?" Ava took a breath. "The Langstons aren't just trying to ruin your business." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with something dark. "They want to destroy you completely." Daniel's entire body tensed. "Explain." Ava hesitated. Then, in a whisper, she said, "They don't just want your company, Daniel. They want Sam." The air left Daniel's lungs. His vision blurred with rage. Victor had dared to go after his son. The war had just become personal. And Daniel Blackwood never lost a war. Daniel's entire body turned to stone. His breath came out slow, measured, too controlled. A dangerous kind of quiet. Ava saw it in his eyes. A storm brewing. A man on the verge of unleashing something unstoppable. "Explain," he demanded. Ava swallowed hard. "Victor has been planning this for a long time, Daniel. He doesn't just want to take over Blackwood Enterprises. He wants to wipe out your entire legacy. And he knows the best way to do that isn't through you." She hesitated. "It's through Sam." Daniel's fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath and forced herself to continue. "Victor believes that if he can make you unfit to be a father, if he can prove that Sam isn't safe with you, he can take him away, legally or otherwise." Daniel's vision turned red. "He wants my son." Ava nodded grimly. "And he's willing to do anything to make it happen." The air in the office became suffocating. Daniel had faced threats before. Rivals who wanted to destroy his business, people who tried to sabotage him in the corporate world. He had crushed them all without hesitation. But this wasn't about business. This was about his son. And that was something no one touched. His voice was deadly quiet. "How do you know all of this?" Ava stiffened. She knew this question was coming. She had spent so long trying to bury her past, but there was no escaping it now. "I told you," she whispered. "I used to work for the Langstons." Daniel's stare burned into her. "And," Ava exhaled shakily, "and I was there when Victor first started planning this. I heard everything. He wanted to find a way to make you look incompetent. A scandal. A weakness. Something that would make the courts believe Sam was better off somewhere else." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Why?" Ava hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Because he blames you for his father's death." Daniel's breath caught. His mind flashed back to years ago. Victor's father, Richard Langston, had been a ruthless businessman, just like his son. He had tried to sabotage Daniel's company, playing dirty games in the industry. But Daniel had fought back harder. And one night, Richard Langston suffered a fatal heart attack. There had never been proof that Daniel was responsible. But Victor had never believed in coincidences. His voice was a low growl. "That was years ago." Ava nodded. "Victor doesn't care. He doesn't just want revenge. He wants to erase you. And now, he sees Sam as the best way to do it." Daniel turned away, running a hand through his hair. His heart was pounding, but his mind was clearer than ever. If Victor wanted a war, he had just declared one. And Daniel wasn't going to let him win. Ava watched Daniel carefully. She had never seen him like this. For weeks, she had only known him as the cold, calculating CEO. The man who never let anyone get too close. But now she saw something raw. Something terrifying. Something unstoppable. "Victor made a mistake," Daniel said finally. His voice was steel. "He thinks he can take my son from me." Ava swallowed. "And if he tries?" Daniel turned back to her, his eyes dark. "He won't live long enough to regret it." Ava shivered. This wasn't just a business rivalry anymore. This was personal. And in a battle like this, there were no rules. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, staring out at the dark sky, his mind racing. He had spent his entire life building walls, keeping emotions out, keeping people at a distance. But Ava had shattered those walls. Not just because of what she had done for Sam. Not just because she had risked everything to protect his son. But because she had forced him to feel something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Fear. Not for himself, but for Sam. For Ava. For what was coming next. He didn't trust easily. But Ava, she was different. And that scared him more than anything. The next morning, Daniel called his lawyers. "If Victor Langston even breathes in the direction of my son, I want to know about it." The lawyer hesitated. "Sir, if he's planning to go through legal channels." Daniel's voice was ice. "He won't get the chance." The call ended. Daniel turned back toward the hallway, his mind already racing with strategies. But as he walked past Sam's room, he stopped. The door was slightly open, and inside he saw Ava sitting beside Sam's bed, stroking his hair as he slept. Something inside Daniel cracked. She had no reason to stay. She could have walked away after everything. But she didn't. She stayed. For Sam. For him. And that was the moment Daniel realized. He wasn't just protecting his son anymore. He was protecting her. And he would do whatever it took to keep them both safe. No matter the cost. Daniel had faced a lot of battles in his life. Corporate wars. Ruthless negotiations. Business rivals trying to take him down. But none of them compared to this. This was a fight for his family. And he wasn't going to lose. The next morning, Daniel sat at the head of the long dining table, sipping his black coffee. Across from him, Ava sat quietly, stirring her tea, her mind clearly elsewhere. Sam sat between them, happily munching on his pancakes, completely unaware of the tension in the room. Daniel had barely spoken a word to Ava since last night. Not because he didn't want to, because he didn't know how. She had been honest with him. Brutally honest. And now, he had to decide what to do with that truth. Finally, Ava broke the silence. "Are you going to fire me?" she asked softly. Daniel set his coffee down, his sharp blue eyes locking onto hers. "If I wanted to fire you, you wouldn't be here right now." Ava exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Then what happens next?" Daniel leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Next, we take control of the situation." Ava frowned. "How?" Daniel's voice was steady, calculated. "Victor thinks he can use legal means to take Sam. He thinks he can build a case against me, make me look unfit." He paused. "But he doesn't know I'm already 10 steps ahead." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Daniel's lips curled into a smirk. Meaning I just bought out the law firm Victor was using to build his case against me. Ava's eyes widened. You what? Daniel shrugged. Money talks. They no longer work for him. And if he tries to hire another firm, I'll buy them too. Ava let out a small, incredulous laugh. You really do play dirty, don't you? Daniel's smirk faded. This isn't a game, Ava. This is my son's life. Her expression softened. I know. Daniel studied her for a moment. Which is why I need to know one thing. Ava tilted her head. What? Are you in this with me? The weight of the question settled between them. He wasn't just asking if she'd stay as Sam's nanny. He was asking if she was willing to fight alongside him, to stand with him against Victor. Ava took a slow breath. She thought about everything, about how she had spent years running from her past, about how she had tried to live a quiet, simple life. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Sam. And, though she wasn't ready to admit it, it was about Daniel too. She met his gaze. I'm in. Daniel nodded once. Good. Ava hesitated. But what about Liam? He's still a threat too. Daniel's expression darkened. I'll deal with him. Ava frowned. And how exactly do you plan on doing that? Daniel's smirk returned, but this time it was laced with something dangerous. You'll see. That evening, Daniel made a call. The person on the other end answered on the first ring. Daniel Blackwood. The voice was deep, calculated. Didn't think I'd be hearing from you. Daniel's jaw tightened. I need a favor. A low chuckle. What kind of favor? Daniel's eyes darkened. One that makes Liam Langston disappear from my life, permanently. The line went silent. Then, you're serious? Deadly. A slow, approving hum. Well then, let's talk business. Daniel exhaled slowly, gripping the phone. Victor wanted a war. He was about to get one. Ava paced back and forth in her bedroom, unable to shake the feeling that something big was coming. She trusted Daniel. But she also knew he was capable of doing things most men wouldn't. And whatever he was planning, she had a feeling it wouldn't be pretty. She sat down on the edge of her bed, running a hand through her hair. Her past had caught up with her. And now, there was no turning back. A knock at the door made her jump. She stood up, taking a deep breath before opening it. Daniel stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway. His expression was unreadable. Can we talk? He asked. Ava nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The moment the door shut, Daniel turned to face her. There's something you're not telling me, he said quietly. Ava stiffened. What do you mean? Daniel took a slow step closer. I mean, you told me you left the Langstons because of what they were planning. But I think there's more to it than that. Ava's heart pounded. Daniel's voice was soft but firm. What are you hiding, Ava? She hesitated. She had been running from the truth for so long. But Daniel wasn't the kind of man who let things go. And if she didn't tell him now, she might lose everything. Ava swallowed hard. Then, in a whisper, she said, I didn't just leave the Langstons, Daniel. I betrayed them. Daniel's eyes darkened. How? Ava took a shaky breath. Because I stole something from them. Daniel's expression remained unreadable, but his body tensed. What did you take? Ava hesitated. Then, a loud crash sounded from outside. Daniel's head snapped toward the window. Ava's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Daniel moved first. He grabbed Ava's wrist and pulled her toward the door. Stay behind me, he ordered. But Ava wasn't listening. Because deep down, she already knew. Liam had come back. And this time, he wasn't alone. Daniel moved fast. His instincts took over as he led Ava down the hall, his grip on her wrist firm but not painful. Another loud crash echoed through the mansion. It sounded like glass shattering. Ava's breath hitched. Sam. Daniel didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward Sam's room, his heart slamming against his ribs. If Victor or Liam had dared to, he shoved the door open. Sam was sitting up in bed, his wide blue eyes filled with confusion and fear. Daddy. Ava rushed past Daniel and scooped Sam into her arms, holding him tightly. It's okay, sweetheart. We're here. Daniel scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place. No broken windows. No intruders. Then where had that crash come from? A voice crackled through the intercom system. Sir. Mark Holloway, his head of security. His tone was urgent. You need to get to the front entrance. Now. Daniel's eyes darkened. He turned to Ava. Stay here with Sam. Lock the door. Ava's grip on Sam tightened. Daniel, wait. But he was already gone. Daniel reached the front entrance in seconds. The massive glass doors of the mansion were shattered, the shards reflecting the moonlight like tiny daggers. And standing in the middle of the chaos, completely at ease, was Liam Langston. His suit was crisp, untouched by the destruction around him. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking up at Daniel with a smirk. "Evening, Blackwood." Daniel's hands curled into fists. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Liam chuckled. "Did I?" Mark and the security team had their weapons drawn, surrounding Liam in a tight formation. But Liam wasn't alone. Behind him, two men stood with their hands in their coat pockets. Their expressions were blank, emotionless. Daniel's gaze flicked to them, then back to Liam. "You really think this was a smart move?" Liam sighed dramatically. "Come on, Daniel. No need to be so tense. I'm just here for a chat." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You broke into my house." Liam shrugged. "You ignored my warning." Daniel took a slow step forward. "If you think I'm scared of you, you're more of an idiot than I thought." Liam's smirk widened. "See, that's the thing. I don't need you to be scared." His green eyes gleamed with something dark. "I just need you to listen." Daniel exhaled sharply. "You have 10 seconds. Liam tilted his head. "You and I both know where this is heading, Blackwood. My brother doesn't stop. And you don't break." He sighed. "Which means, eventually, one of you is going to have to be taken off the board." Daniel's muscles tensed. "Is that a threat?" Liam smiled. "No. It's a guarantee." Silence stretched between them. Then, Liam's smirk faded. His expression turned serious. "Look, I don't care about this war my brother is waging," he admitted. "I really don't. But you've got something, or rather someone, that makes this a whole lot messier." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Ava." Liam's expression darkened. "She stole from my family. And we don't let that go." Daniel didn't blink. "I don't care what she did to you or your brother. She's under my protection now." Liam chuckled. "Oh, Blackwood. You don't get it, do you?" He leaned in slightly. "Ava isn't just someone who walked away. She's the one who betrayed us." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Betrayed you how?" Liam's smile returned. "Oh, she didn't tell you?" He let out a low whistle. "That's interesting." Daniel didn't move. Liam shrugged. "Guess you'll have to ask her yourself." Daniel's mind raced. What hadn't Ava told him? Liam stepped back, hands in his pockets. "You've got a decision to make, Blackwood. You can keep protecting Ava, but that means you're painting a target on your own back. Or," he let the word hang in the air. Daniel's voice was razor-sharp. "Or what?" Liam's smile was slow, deliberate. "Or you hand her over." The air around them grew thick. Daniel's fingers twitched. He had made a lot of ruthless deals in his life. Negotiated terms that left men in ruins. But this? This wasn't up for negotiation. His voice was ice. "Get out of my house." Liam sighed, shaking his head. "You really are the stubborn type." Daniel took another step forward, his presence dominating the space between them. "If you ever step foot near my son again, I won't just take down Victor." His blue eyes burned with pure, unfiltered rage. "I'll destroy you first." Liam studied him for a moment, then let out a soft chuckle. "Well, that answers that." Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out. His two men followed. The second the doors shut behind them, Daniel turned to Mark. "Double the security. I want eyes on every entrance, every hallway." His voice was sharp, full of controlled fury. "No one gets in. No one gets out without my approval." Mark nodded. "Understood, sir." Daniel took a slow breath. Then he turned and walked toward Ava's room, because he had a new question that needed answering. And this time, she wasn't going to run from the truth. Ava sat at the edge of Sam's bed, her fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. She had locked the door after Daniel left, but it hadn't made her feel any safer. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't over. She ran a hand down Sam's back as he slept, listening to his soft breathing. And then, a knock at the door. Ava's heart pounded. She stood slowly, careful not to wake Sam. When she opened the door, Daniel was there. His expression was unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. Ava exhaled shakily. "Daniel, I." But before she could say anything else, his next words stopped her cold. "What did you steal from the Langstons?" Ava's breath hitched. He knew. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling at her sides. "I." Daniel's eyes darkened. "Tell me the truth, Ava." She hesitated. Then, finally, she whispered, "I stole the one thing Victor Langston couldn't afford to lose." Daniel's entire body went still. "What?" Ava took a deep breath. "A list," she said. "A list of every corrupt deal Victor has ever made. Every bribe. Every politician he's paid off. Every illegal transaction tied to his company. Daniel's mind reeled. That wasn't just dangerous. That was enough to destroy Victor Langston. And now, Daniel knew exactly why Victor was after Ava. Because she was holding the key to his downfall. And Victor would kill to get it back. Daniel stared at Ava, his mind working faster than ever. A list. A list that could bring Victor Langston to his knees. And Ava had stolen it. Where is it? His voice was low, controlled, but there was an unmistakable edge of urgency. Ava swallowed hard. I hid it. Daniel's eyes darkened. Where? Ava hesitated. She knew the second she told him, there would be no going back. Somewhere safe, she finally said. Daniel's jaw clenched. That's not an answer, Ava. She exhaled sharply. I didn't want to tell you because I knew this would happen. The second you found out, you'd want to use it against him. And that puts you, Sam, and everyone in this house in danger. Daniel stepped closer, his towering frame forcing her to look up at him. Ava, we are already in danger. His voice was fierce but quiet enough not to wake Sam. Victor won't stop until he gets what he wants. And now, thanks to Liam, he knows I'm protecting you. Ava wrapped her arms around herself. I didn't want you involved in this. Daniel's blue eyes locked onto hers. Too late. A heavy silence settled between them. Then, Ava sighed. It's in a storage facility in Brooklyn, under a fake name. No one knows it's there. Daniel's mind immediately began calculating. Then we get it before Victor does. Ava shook her head. It's not that simple. If he even suspects we're going after it, he'll have people watching. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. Then we'll be smarter. Ava hesitated. You're really willing to risk everything for this? Daniel didn't blink. I've already risked everything. His voice softened slightly. And I'm not letting you face this alone. Ava's breath caught. She had spent so long running, fighting battles on her own. But for the first time, she wasn't alone anymore. She nodded slowly. Okay, we do this together. Daniel nodded back. Together. But before he could say more, Sam stirred in his bed. His small voice was groggy. Ava. Ava turned instantly, sitting beside him. I'm here, sweetheart. Sam's tiny hand reached for hers. Are we safe now? Ava's heart clenched. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady, strong. No one is ever going to take you away from me, buddy. That's a promise. Sam looked up at him, trusting, believing. Ava swallowed past the lump in her throat. This wasn't just about the list anymore. This was about protecting a child who had already lost too much. And no matter what happened next, she wasn't going to let him lose his father, too. The next morning, Daniel made a call. Mr. Blackwood. Mark Holloway answered immediately. Security is already in place around the estate. Good, Daniel said. But I need another team. Quiet. No paper trail. Mark didn't hesitate. Understood. What's the job? Daniel's jaw tightened. A retrieval mission. Mark let out a low hum. You don't usually do retrieval, sir. You usually do destruction. Daniel's lips curved into a smirk. That's still on the table. Mark chuckled. All right. When do we move? Daniel glanced at Ava across the room. Tonight. Hours later, Ava stood in the hallway, staring at the grand chandelier above her. She had spent years running, avoiding this moment. Now it was happening. Daniel stepped up beside her. Are you ready? Ava took a deep breath. I don't think I'll ever be ready for this. Daniel's gaze softened slightly. Then let's make sure we finish it. She turned to face him fully. Daniel, if something happens. Nothing will happen, he cut in firmly. Ava shook her head. You can't promise that. Daniel exhaled slowly. Maybe not. But I can promise this, Victor won't win. Ava studied him, the way his jaw was set, the way his eyes held nothing but determination. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. She trusted him. Completely. She nodded. Then let's go. Daniel took her hand, his grip steady. Strong. And together, they stepped into the darkness. Straight into war. The black SUV moved through the quiet streets of Brooklyn, its tinted windows shielding its passengers from prying eyes. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, his jaw tight, his mind running through every possible scenario. He had been in high-stakes situations before, but this, retrieving a stolen list that could take down one of the most powerful men in the industry, was different. Because this time, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Sam, for Ava, for the family he hadn't even realized he was building. Beside him, Ava sat still, her hands resting on her lap. But Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept stealing glances out the window as if expecting danger at every turn. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said quietly. Ava turned to him, her hazel eyes searching his. "Yes, I do." Daniel nodded once, knowing there was no point in arguing. "How much security do you think Victor has watching this place?" Mark's voice came from the driver's seat. Ava exhaled. "If I know Victor, he won't risk drawing too much attention. He's probably got a few men watching the facility, but he won't send a full team until he's sure the list is there." Daniel smirked. "Then let's make sure we get to it first." Mark pulled the SUV into an alleyway a block away from the storage facility. "We go in, get the list, and get out," Daniel said. His voice was sharp, commanding. "No unnecessary risks." Ava nodded. Daniel turned to Mark. "Stay with the car. If we're not back in 10 minutes, call in backup." Mark frowned. "You sure you don't want me going in with you?" Daniel's expression was firm. "If something goes wrong, I need someone on the outside ready to get Ava out of here." Mark's gaze flicked to Ava, then back to Daniel. He gave a small nod. "Understood." Daniel pushed the car door open and stepped out. Ava followed. The night was cold, the air thick with tension as they moved toward the storage facility. Ava led the way, her movements swift and silent. She had been here before. She knew exactly where she had hidden the list. Daniel stayed close behind, his sharp eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. The facility was dimly lit, the rows of storage units stretching into the darkness. Ava stopped in front of Unit 47. "This is it," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Do it fast." Ava reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out a small key. Her hands were steady as she unlocked the unit and pushed the metal door up just enough for them to slip inside. Daniel pulled out a flashlight, the beam illuminating stacks of old boxes and covered furniture. Ava moved to the farthest corner and pulled out a dusty black duffel bag. "This is it," she said. Daniel nodded. "Let's go." But just as Ava zipped the bag shut, a voice rang through the air. "Going somewhere?" Ava's breath hitched. Daniel turned slowly, his body tensing. Liam Langston stood just outside the storage unit, leaning against the doorframe with his usual smirk. Behind him, 3 men dressed in black stood with their hands resting near their concealed weapons. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" Liam chuckled. "You know me, Blackwood. Always persistent." Ava clutched the duffel bag tightly. "How did you find us?" Liam smirked. "Oh, Ava. Did you really think Victor wouldn't have someone watching this place? We've been waiting for you to make your move." Daniel stepped slightly in front of Ava, his stance unshakable. "Then you made a mistake coming here." Liam's eyes gleamed. "And why's that?" Daniel's smirk was deadly. "Because I don't lose." Before Liam could react, Daniel moved. With lightning speed, he grabbed the metal storage door and slammed it upward with full force. The impact knocked Liam back, giving Daniel just enough time to pull Ava behind him. "Run," he ordered. Ava didn't hesitate. She clutched the duffel bag and sprinted down the narrow aisle between storage units. Daniel followed, his sharp instincts guiding him as Liam's men started shouting. A gunshot rang out, the bullet barely missing Daniel as it ricocheted off a metal wall. "Get to the car," Daniel barked. Ava reached the alleyway first, her breath ragged as she spotted Mark already waiting with the SUV. "Drive," she shouted as she threw herself into the back seat. Daniel was seconds behind her, his body tense with adrenaline as he dove into the car just as Mark hit the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as the SUV shot forward. Through the rearview mirror, Daniel saw Liam standing at the entrance of the storage facility, watching them escape. His smirk was gone. Daniel turned to Ava. "Are you okay?" Ava exhaled shakily, nodding. "Yeah." Daniel's gaze flickered to the duffel bag in her lap. "Do you have it?" Ava nodded. "It's all here." Daniel leaned back against the seat, his mind already working through the next steps. Victor Langston had been playing this game for years. But now, Daniel had the winning piece. And he was about to end this war once and for all. For Sam. For Ava. For everything the Langstons had tried to take from him. Victor had no idea what was coming. The ride back to the Blackwood estate was silent, thick with tension. Ava clutched the duffel bag against her chest, her knuckles white from gripping the straps too tightly. She still hadn't fully processed what had just happened. Liam had been waiting for them. They had walked straight into a trap. And somehow they had still made it out. Daniel sat beside her, his face unreadable, his jaw clenched as he stared out the window. She could practically feel the controlled rage radiating off of him. A war was coming, and Daniel Blackwood didn't lose wars. The moment they reached the estate, Daniel led Ava inside. Mark followed, securing the perimeter as the SUV disappeared into the garage. The second the front doors shut behind them, Daniel turned to Ava. "Let me see it." Ava hesitated for half a second before placing the duffel bag on the table and unzipping it. Stacks of files, flash drives, evidence that could bring Victor Langston crashing down. Daniel's sharp blue eyes scanned the contents, his mind already racing through every possible way to use this. "This is enough to bury him," he muttered. Ava exhaled. "I told you." Daniel closed the bag, gripping the top tightly. "We release this to the right people, and Victor loses everything. His power, his influence, his entire empire." Ava hesitated. "But he won't go down quietly." Daniel's gaze flickered to her. "No, he won't." Ava crossed her arms, her mind still reeling. "He's going to come after us. After you. After Sam." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Let him try." Ava shook her head. "Daniel, this isn't just a business war anymore. This is personal. If we do this, we're not just ruining him, we're making him desperate." Daniel's smirk was sharp, dangerous. "Good." Ava inhaled sharply, stepping closer. "Daniel." His expression softened, just slightly. "What?" She exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. "If something happens to you." "It won't." Ava swallowed hard. "You can't promise that." Daniel took another step forward, closing the space between them. His voice was low, steady. "Ava, listen to me. I've spent my entire life fighting men like Victor. I don't lose. I won't lose." Ava's throat tightened. "You're not invincible," she whispered. Daniel's gaze locked onto hers. "No, but I'll do whatever it takes to protect my son. And to protect you." Ava's breath hitched. She opened her mouth to say something, but a loud explosion rocked the estate. The walls shook. The lights flickered. Ava gasped, stumbling backward. Daniel's eyes snapped toward the window. Outside, a plume of smoke rose into the night sky. Then, another explosion. The garage. Daniel's mind clicked instantly. "They're here." Ava's pulse pounded. "Victor." Daniel turned to Mark. "Lock down the estate. Get Sam somewhere safe." Mark nodded sharply and disappeared down the hall. Daniel grabbed Ava's wrist, pulling her toward the staircase. "Come on." Ava's heart raced. "Where are we going?" Daniel didn't answer. He led her through a hidden door behind the bookshelf, revealing a dimly lit staircase. Ava's eyes widened. "A panic room?" Daniel smirked. "Something like that." They descended into a sleek underground control room. Security monitors lined the walls, showing live footage of the estate. On the screens, black SUVs rolled through the gates, armed men pouring out. Victor had sent his army. Daniel's jaw tightened. "He's making his move." Ava's chest rose and fell rapidly. "Daniel, what do we do?" Daniel turned to her, his blue eyes blazing. "We end this." Ava's breath caught. Daniel reached for a hidden compartment in the wall, pulling out a sleek handgun. Ava's eyes widened. "You have guns down here?" Daniel smirked. "You expected anything less?" Ava huffed out a shaky breath. "What's the plan?" Daniel loaded the weapon, his movements precise. "We split up. You take Sam and get out through the tunnel. Mark will cover you." Ava stiffened. "And you?" Daniel smirked. "I'm going to welcome Victor's men personally." Ava's heart clenched. "Daniel, no." He cupped her face, his touch firm but gentle. "Trust me." Ava's breath hitched. And for the first time in years, she did. She nodded. "Be careful." Daniel's smirk faded, replaced by something softer. "Always." Ava hesitated. Then, before she could stop herself, she rose onto her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Daniel's entire body went still. Ava pulled back, her cheeks flushing. "Just in case." Daniel's smirk returned, but this time it was softer. "I'll hold you to that." Then, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Ava exhaled sharply, her heart hammering. Then she grabbed the duffel bag and ran. Outside, chaos erupted. Gunfire. Shouting. Daniel moved like a predator through the halls, taking out Victor's men one by one. They weren't expecting him to fight back. Big mistake. He reached the front entrance, stepping into the moonlight. And there, standing in the center of the chaos, was Victor Langston. His expensive suit was immaculate, his expression smug. Daniel smirked, raising his gun. "You look a little overdressed for a funeral, Victor." Victor chuckled. "Oh, Daniel. You always were arrogant. Daniel's smirk didn't fade. And you always were an idiot. Victor's smile sharpened. Hand over Ava and the list, and I'll make this easy for you. Daniel cocked his gun. Not happening. Victor sighed. Then I guess we do this the hard way. Daniel's blue eyes burned. The hard way it is. Then, the war began. Gunfire erupted. Men fell. And Daniel Blackwood did what he did best. He won. By the time the dust settled, Victor Langston was on his knees, his once smug face twisted in fury. Daniel stood over him, his gun trained on Victor's chest. You should have stayed in your lane, Daniel muttered. Victor spat blood onto the ground. This isn't over. Daniel smirked. Oh, it is. Ava's voice rang out from behind. Daniel. Daniel turned. Ava stood at the entrance, Sam clinging to her side. She met his gaze, her hazel eyes filled with something unreadable. Then she walked forward, stopping beside him. She looked down at Victor. You lost, she said softly. Victor sneered. You think you're safe now? Ava's gaze hardened. No, but we're free. Daniel tightened his grip on the gun. And you? You're done. Victor glared at him. You don't have the guts to. Daniel smirked. Oh, I do. But the law will handle you first. Sirens wailed in the distance. Victor's face paled. Daniel turned to Ava. Ready to go home? Ava exhaled. And for the first time in a long time. She was. She nodded. Yeah, let's go home. Daniel took her hand. And together they walked away. Their war was over. But their story, it was just beginning.